Hi, man, it's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and the winner from the poll for today's topic was why the SNP, the Scottish Nationalist Party, don't want to adopt the euro in the event of Scotland becoming independent. The general worldview, of course, is that an independent Scotland would seek to join the EU with all haste. The SNP have certainly given rise to this belief. And in a sense, it could be that the policymakers within the party may not oppose it at all, but many people in Scotland would. Now, when it comes down to it, people in all parts of the UK have a number of common traits, and a belief that we're somehow separate from the rest of Europe is right up there. It is what has caused such friction between the UK and the EU in general anyway. And as a population in general, we have always seen ourselves as just outside Europe for historical reasons from before and since the Union. This could also have something to do with the fact that we're a bloody big island. You should have seen the fuss that people made when we moved away from imperial measures of weight in shops to metric. I remember it as I was growing up, going from asking for a quarter of jelly babies to 100 grams of jelly babies. And they kept the price the same as well when they made the change. Sneaky little trick, because 100 grams is less than a quarter. And if it were even suggested that we should do the same with our units of distance and go from miles to kilometres, we'd probably go insane. Never mind that very few of the people railing against metric can handle any calculations in imperial units and would easily be able to in metric. So what I'm saying is we have these completely irrational refusals to change familiar systems to ones, even when the system we have now is really unwieldy and it defies all logic. So the notion of changing a currency would be the sin of sins. It's a really defining feature, or so we think anyway. So not only would it be changing the name of the money used, potentially, but it would certainly mean not having full control over your currency, over the currency policy. So it would be as part of a union of many countries, and Scotland would not be at the top of the tree within that union either. Now, the second one, of course, makes much more sense for nationalists perhaps as well. Already wanting to move away from a historical and productive union, it probably makes no sense to then charge headlong into joining another union where they'd have even less influence than the one they're trying to move away from. But the independence referendum a few years ago, there was a plan to retain the use of the pound and form a currency union with the remains of the UK. That was rejected by Westminster. But the fact that this was the plan speaks volumes about how Britons have attachments to certain defining features. After all, wouldn't people who want to form what would essentially be a new country also want to start its systems from scratch? Wipe the slate clean. At least as far as is practical to do so. Perhaps not, it seems. At least not for some. There are some who would definitely be in favour of it. Now, more recently, the SNP have been thinking about the future currency of Scotland. A bit baffling that a group of people who have wanted independence for so long have never really thought about this before, but never mind, better late than never. It was a complete bear trap for them in the last referendum that had to be tackled before they could ever hope for another one, of course. Now, there's been a party conference for the SNP this weekend, and they agreed proposals for the way forward in this area, though it wasn't quite what the leadership were pushing for, but it's not a million miles away. So the leadership's plan was to retain the pound, accepting that they'll have no control over it for the time being, and then move over to their own currency when 6 economic tests are met. Now, there'd be nothing to stop them calling it the pound, of course. The name really isn't an issue. It would just be the Scottish pound, or they could call it something else, the haggis or something, I don't know. There are lots of different types of dollars in the world. There's even more than one type of pound in the world, so the name really isn't an issue. However, the tests that they wanted to apply were incapable of being met anytime soon. It could be apparently 10 years before at least one of them could realistically be met. Not soon enough for most party members at the conference. So the proposal now is that a decision on an independent currency should be made within the first term post-independence of the Scottish Parliament. Of course, that Parliament could still decide not to proceed at that time, but it would have to make that decision. But the SNP say they intend to join the EU as an independent Scotland as soon as possible. Now, in such circumstances, surely they'd be adopting the euro. They'd have to. So why go to all the trouble of developing a separate currency? It's not like they'd be doing so for the period between leaving the UK and joining the EU, because they intend that period of time to be very brief. whether or not it would be is up for debate. So why not just retain the use of the pound until joining the EU, because they're going to have to retain the use of the pound either way for a few years anyway. That is something that has puzzled me a little bit in some ways, and there's a couple of possibilities. The first is that it could just be a fairly sensible plan in the event that joining the EU takes longer than anticipated. After all, a plan to adopt a new currency doesn't have to come to fruition if circumstances lead them elsewhere. Let's say within 7 or 8 years they're going to be joining the EU. They could just say, well, there's no point in adopting a new currency for 1 year, is there? We'll just stay with the pound. But the second thing, little thought that keeps buzzing around my head, is that the SNP are essentially all about leaving a union of countries with shared values, shared cultures, shared language, and where we produce the most powerful nation on earth, though now much deflated, of course, and if only some people in the country would realise that. Now, the official SNP position is that it is a definite pro-European group, pro-EU group. It campaigned to remain in the EU, as did virtually every party in Westminster, and it has consistently spoken out in favour of remaining within the EU even since the referendum. In fact, much more easily since the referendum, because a majority of Scotland, of course, voted to remain. But are their supporters at large quite so keen? It occurs to me that people who want to leave one union may not necessarily want to join another. After all, what is it that they get from the EU outside of the UK that they don't get from the EU as part of the UK, or at least believe that they get? I just wonder if this currency plan is a muted acknowledgement that perhaps Brexit is a useful device for creating divisions between Scotland and the rest of the UK, but potentially a stumbling block for the practical aspects of independence. I imagine the political calculation is all about forging ahead with all of the systems that would meet with the approval of people who may support independence, knowing that an independent Scotland would be compelled to adopt the euro. There'd be no say in it if it wanted to join the EU at any rate. Whereas if they discussed publicly before independence, some who may have voted in favour of it would then vote against it. After all, if the issue of currency is such an important issue for some people, remaining in the UK is the only way of retaining the pound. There's no realistic way that an independent Scotland would not join the EU. They know that because there were significantly more. It's not like there's even a tight margin to play with. There was significantly more in favour of remaining in the EU. So realistically, Scotland would vote to join the EU, and so that would mean you would definitely be losing that currency. So maybe that's the political thinking there. That's the best I can come up with anyway. Let me know what you think down below, of course, especially our fellow Scots. And I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, click the bell notification as well. And until next time, I'll see you later.